Okay, so we're back and let's talk about osteoporosis. So osteoporosis refers to osteo means bone and porosis means, porous. So it's when your bone, which normally looks like the picture on the left, starts to get bigger holes in it and therefore becomes weaker. Remember back in the previous lecture when I was talking about the triathlete and look how thick his bones were. He's one of the things that repetitive activities like jogging or walking does for our body is strengthens our bone. It's harder to develop osteoporosis if you're doing weight-bearing exercises. There are certain risk factors for osteoporosis, and in our classroom I linked a video that explains some of the risk factors. Besides age, we have factors like race and sex and other kinds of things that can affect your likelihood of developing osteoporosis. Something that I want to mention here in case you don't go watch the other video is younger people consuming dark colas. There's a chemical in the cola that actually depletes calcium from your bones, and they've found that in people kids who are consuming more than 2 cans of cola a day, so that would be like 24 ounces of cola a day, have been showing increased rates of bone breakage and evidence of osteoporosis very young. So they recommend not drinking more than 1 cola caffeinated kind of beverage, because I think it's the magnesium that's depleting could be the potassium, I can't remember which one, that's depleting the calcium in the bone. So it's something that we set up, like we were talking about before when we talked about emerging adulthood, and how the things that you do in the early adulthood years set you up for things that will start to manifest themselves in your 40s and 50s. So these are things to consider, which brings us up to the issue of health habits. Substance use, illicit drug use is rare in adulthood. There's a subset of people who in their 25 and over period, so we'll see that in the 26 to 29 would be our youngest age bracket for our concern right now, up to the 64, and you see the percentage using some kind of illicit drug in the past month is pretty low, right? We're looking at the peak, the max, we're looking at less than 15% of people, and by 35 to 39 we're down to less than 10% of people using some kind of illicit drug. So with age it becomes much less likely. If we look at the past month illicit drug use and break it down by drug, you'll see that the most common one is marijuana, followed by prescription drugs. And this would be off-label uses. They were not prescribed uses of prescription medications. And then you see very low rates of cocaine and hallucinogens and inhalants and heroin. So most people don't do those things. Marijuana use has, of course, been increasing in recent years, and of course in the state of Washington it's legal, and so we've seen a significant jump in use since that happened. And so we see the percent using marijuana in the past month in our age bracket that we're interested in, we're looking at about a third of people between 26 and 34, and then about a quarter of people between the ages of 35 and 49, probably up to 54, we could say about a quarter, and about 20% or less over that age. A lot of people are now saying, marijuana works for a lot of medicinal purposes, and so people are using it thinking that it's a type of medicine. The one thing I would just like to point out is that self-diagnosis and self-application is never a really good idea for any kind of medication. I'm sure that people who misuse prescription drugs feel like they're doing it for medicinal purposes, not for addiction purposes. So it's really important for people to be aware that a lot of the things that are being claimed about marijuana's benefits have not really been objectively tested, and they're anecdotal evidence. And when people say this worked for me, that doesn't necessarily mean that the marijuana is the reason why they felt better. It may be placebo effect, expectations. It might be spontaneous remission that caused the improvement. You never know until it's tested. And so now that it's legal in a lot of states, it may start to be open for research on the actual benefits. So we'll be looking for that to be coming up in the next 10 years or so. Prescription drug abuse. Again, we're seeing a lot of people using prescription drugs for things that they're not really intended for, but you'll notice it's more common in adolescents and the emerging adults than it is among people who are age 26 and older. They've broken it down here by metropolitan, non-metropolitan, and rural, and then by males and females. And you can see differences a little bit by those breakdowns, but the biggest explanatory thing is younger people seem to be misusing prescriptions. Tobacco use. We've been seeing over the course of time a decrease in tobacco use. They've broken it down by different kinds of tobacco and then by age group. So each of the columns represents a different kind of tobacco product. And then they're stacking the age groups on top of each other. So we're going to be interested in the lightest blue and then the medium color blue for our age bracket right now. And so you can see people between 25 and 64 are the biggest users, except for of the water pipe hookah, which the 18 to 24-year-olds seem to prefer. But all other methods of delivering tobacco seem to be most popular among the 25 to 64-year-olds. The 18 to 24 are not using the combustible tobacco products, the cigarillos, filtered little cigars. The regular pipe, not very popular among the youngest people and the oldest people, but kind of being used by the middle group. E-cigs, we're seeing a large number of 25 to 44-year-olds and kind of equal numbers of 18 to 24 and 45 to 64, and then a large number of 25 to 44-year-olds using smokeless tobacco. So those are our trends in tobacco use. A lot of people feel like if you're not burning it and smoking it, then it's less dangerous and that it doesn't have the toxins, all these other things that we've been told about being in commercially raised tobacco. But the nicotine has benefits to how we think and things like that. So it's got those sort of same medicinal properties that one could argue about marijuana, but it also has a clearly addictive quality to it that makes it difficult to stop using it if you want to stop using it. Marijuana doesn't have the physical addiction, but it has the psychological addiction that makes people not want to stop using it, even if their body would be okay without stopping. With stopping, they psychologically don't want to stop. So it's both tobacco and marijuana have similar qualities as far as sort of could have medicinal purposes, but also could have some negative effects as well. How about alcohol? Something that's kind of surprising, I think, is to find out what a serving size is. 12 ounces of regular beer, so 1 can is considered a serving. 8 to 9 ounces of a malt liquor. Malt liquor tends to come in larger packages than regular beer does, but it takes less malt liquor to be considered a serving than it takes of beer. 5 ounces of table wine. A lot of our wine glasses are actually 10 or 12 ounce wine glasses, and people tend to overserve themselves. And then 1.5 fluid ounces of distilled alcohol. So 1 shot of distilled alcohol would be considered a serving. 1 to 2 servings per day is considered healthful. And it doesn't matter which of these alcohols. You may have heard awesome things about polyphenols in red wine or some other miraculous, it's special. But what they think is actually going on with alcohol is that it thins the blood and reduces the likelihood of cardiovascular problems and strokes and things like that. So it has a medicinal kind of quality to it, but 1 to 2 drinks per day. And so for men, the 2 might be okay. For women, the 1 is probably the more okay side of it because male and female bodies metabolize alcohol differently. It reduces bad cholesterol, raises good cholesterol, reduces cardiovascular disease and strokes. The problem is 20% of adults report that they binge drink at least once a year. And the definition of a binge is 5 or more servings in one sitting. So that's, for a lot of adults, that would be like the Super Bowl and then, Labor Day, right? I mean, it's like a lot of our holidays involve, and yeah, Super Bowl is kind of a holiday in the U.S. anymore, involve sitting, or playing at the beach or whatever for hours and across that day consuming beer or wine coolers or Mike's Hard lemonade or whatever, right? And yeah, you might consume 5 drinks in that amount of time. And so it's a lot of 20% of adults have at least one binge during the year, and binge drinking is considered much more problematic than having, a consistent every single day a serving of something. Continue with health habits. Let's talk a little bit about what we eat. This is the percent of U.S. adults consuming 3 or more vegetables a day, which is the minimum recommended allowance. If here we are in Washington, we're in the 25 to 30% of adults in Washington claim that they eat that many. Oregon's a little higher, 30 to 35%. And so is Tennessee and Virginia, interestingly. They seem to eat more. Boy, it doesn't look so good in Utah and Arizona. I'm kind of surprised, frankly. The ones that report 20 to 25%, some of those states are kind of healthy states that have low rates of obesity and stuff like that. But boy, it doesn't look like South Dakota's eating enough vegetables at all. But it's really common for adults not to get, the highest rate is of people who are saying that they consume at least 3 vegetables a day is 45%. We need to eat more vegetables. Obesity increases the risk of every chronic disease, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, like every chronic disease is enhanced or more likely with obesity. Here we have the prevalence of self-reported obesity among U.S. adults, and the darker the color, the higher the rate. So again, Washington's kind of smack in the middle. So obesity can be, something that will contribute to making a person unhealthy in the long run. Something to keep in mind when we overeat and don't eat enough vegetables and things like that is that our metabolism does decrease across adulthood. And so what that means is that you don't burn as many calories just at rest as you age as you did when you were younger. And so a lot of us, we set up eating habits when we're teenagers, and then we think we should be able to maintain those eating habits throughout adulthood, and we really can't because we don't burn as many calories just at rest as we age. So what can we do? Burn more calories. Yay, exercise. Inactivity is associated with every chronic disease. Actually, inactivity is associated with obesity, right? Because the less active we are, the more likely we are to be obese. The more obese we are, the more likely we are to be inactive. Even small amounts of exercise can really help to boost a person's health. Sitting for long periods of time is very harmful. In fact, some people have said that it's the modern era's version of smoking. Right, just what smoking used to do to people's lungs and cardiovascular systems, sitting is now doing to us. Back, 30 years ago, if you worked in an office and you wanted to tell somebody who worked on the other side of the office something, you had to get up and walk across the office and go tell them. Now you send them a text or an email. We don't move around enough at all. So what they tell us is take the extra step. For one thing, first thing you want to do is make sure that you're orienting your desk chair so that you have the best blood flow and things that you reduce the likelihood of clots, that you can keep your legs stretched out in the right position and things like that so that you don't get stiff. And then get up. Go say hello to somebody. Back in the olden days, I used to have a water cooler in offices. This is so funny. We should have water coolers again. I don't know if the office where I work has one, at school has one, but I don't know if people gather around it like they used to. And chit chat and catch up with each other, but getting up and having to go fill your tiny cup with water rather than keeping a 12-ounce bottle of water at your desk or something. Just get up and move around every 30 minutes can be a benefit. One of the things that I do when I'm working at home is every 30 minutes I get up and I do like little jumping jacks or some kind of crazy thing just to try and stretch out and get myself going again, because otherwise I'll sit here all day and work on PowerPoints, you know what I mean? And that's not really good for us. So speaking of sitting all day making PowerPoints, work and life and all the demands of adulthood can be kind of stressful. And one of the things that stress does to us is gets us ready for a fight or flight. So when we are, we have a deadline looming or something like that, it can put our body into a sense of stress where we think that we need to fight with the thing or we need to flee from the thing. So our bodies were designed for, this is our general adaptation syndrome depiction, for about a 20-minute phase 2 resistance, where we experience the stressor in phase 1 and we go, oh, something scary is happening. I was just told that the report that I thought was next Friday is actually tomorrow. But then we were designed for about 20 minutes of resistance, either fighting with the object, running from the object, whatever it is. And then we get exhausted and we have to repair ourselves. But finding out that the report I thought was going to happen next Friday is actually tomorrow, that's not a 20-minute fight or flight, is it? Our bodies were not really designed for that kind of like thing that we might feel like is a threat, but really isn't an acute threat. So what happens is these stressful life events can raise the alarm bells, the sympathetic nervous system's reaction, with no ability for us to actually, repair ourselves. So let's talk a little bit about that. Stressful life events fit into one of 3 categories. They're the catastrophic events like, an earthquake or a flood or being in a war zone or wildfires burning down your neighborhood or a terrorist attack. These kind of catastrophic events are things that everybody in the community is sharing, and so we have a lot of support in the face of catastrophic events. And a lot of times there is a system for coping with the stressors. So the Red Cross arrives, or things like that, where people who weren't affected by the catastrophe come and help, so that the people who were affected are able to sort of put their one foot in front of the other and cope, and they have a lot of support. In a lot of ways, catastrophic events are less harmful to our bodies over the long term than significant life changes, for example. Significant life changes are sad ones, like a death in the family or a divorce, but any major change is enough to be stressful. So, for example, the birth of a new baby, or getting married, or graduating, something that I'm sure all of you are looking forward to with great anticipation. It's going to be stressful, because you're going to be making a giant change in your life from, student status to no longer doing that. And it's stressful. One of the things about significant life changes is that a lot of times your dearest loved ones, the people who know you, your friends and your family, will realize that you're going through this stressful event and try and help you out in some way or fashion. One of the reasons why we have a big party when people get married is so that the people who are getting married know that we're all behind them and we support what you're doing, and we will, help you and guide you. When a baby's born, we all bring food over to the new family's house and try and, give them a chance to go take a shower or something. These kinds of life events oftentimes pull together the family and the friends of the people who are going through the life events. Probably what's the most actual stressful thing is just little stressors. Oh, I forgot I was going to show you the... Okay, so these little stressors, people experiencing high stress, are usually people who are actually experiencing maybe a combination of significant life changes. Like if you look at the 18 to 19-year-olds, think about how many major life changes they probably are going through. Think back to our social clock, right? They're probably graduating high school, deciding what to do next, go to college, join the military, get a job. Do I move out of my parents' house, or do I stay here? Do I keep my boyfriend or girlfriend from high school, or do I break up because I'm going off into the wide, wide world? I mean, they've got some big changes going on. The good news is, as we age into the 25 to 34-year-old period, we have fewer of these big stressful events that are going on in our lives. We start to move into just sort of regular adulthood where there's stress, but it's starting to wane. And across the adult period, we're going to see a waning of these major stressors. Probably what's most stressful to us, though, that really is the most problematic, are the daily life hassles. Just daily, I got to stand in line for this. You've got to be kidding me. Oh, the traffic. I can't do it. I've got a looming deadline, and I don't know, I got this picture off the internet, but I got a looming deadline and kind of a creepy boss, right? So what's going on here? This is kind of a hassle. These kinds of things may actually be, in the long run, harder on us than catastrophic event or significant life changes, because these little daily life hassles you really can't escape, and everybody's got little daily hassles, so they don't really want to hear about yours. They're Like, I can't really help you with yours. I'm dealing with mine. So you don't get a ton of social support as you're going through them. And sometimes you don't even realize that they're accumulating on you. So the daily hassles may be the most damaging in the long run. And so what do I mean by damaging? Well, when we're under stress, it elevates our blood pressure, and that when we have chronically elevated blood pressure can lead to coronary heart disease. So a person who's under just a slightly elevated degree of stress over time can experience a chronically elevated blood pressure, which then ultimately can harm their cardiovascular system. It's more common among people with type A personalities, hard driving, competitive, perfectionistic people, than it is among type B personalities to have, elevated blood pressure lead to coronary heart disease. Type B personalities are more laid back, are more forgiving of themselves, less perfectionistic, and so they may be more able to cope with the challenges of, day-to-day life without internalizing it so much and ultimately raising their blood pressure. Here we have Mr. Fitzhugh, and it says, your problem, Mr. Fitzhugh, is that you're a type A personality in a Model T body. One of the things that can compound the effects of stress is not exercising, not eating right, things like that. And as we age, it really starts to catch up with us. So it's really important, for us to set up good habits in our early part of our adulthood phase, 25, 30 years old, to, have an exercise routine and a diet that makes sense, and good sleep habits and all those kinds of things, so that when we get into our 40s and our 50s, then we are more resilient. The way that we explain outcomes can have an impact on the likelihood of us developing coronary heart disease. So not only whether you're a type A or type B personality, but if you're more pessimistic, if you attribute outcomes to global, stable traits, internal traits, so if you say, well, I lost my job because, I'm just generally a loser and nothing's ever going to get better, and it's not fair, but it's how it is, right? Like that kind of pessimistic explanation has been associated with higher rates of coronary heart disease than an optimistic interpretation, which would be more like, well, I did the best that I could, and maybe this job really wasn't a great match for me. I'm sure there's something better out there. Those kinds of positive statements are associated with lower rates of coronary heart disease. You're more likely to develop a cold when you're under stress. So they gave people a psychological stress index and then exposed them to the cold virus. And the higher the person was on the stress index, the more likely they were to actually become sick from the cold virus that they were exposed to. Speaking of stress and illness, so when you have persistent stressors, plus the negative explanatory style, the negative emotions, for one thing, it makes it more likely that you'll engage in unhealthy behaviors like smoking or drinking, self-medicating, trying to deal with the stress through those kinds of ways. You're not sleeping well, not eating well. So that's one effect. And then the other thing is that persistent stressors cause us to release stress hormones, which those hormones, cortisol in particular, are known to suppress your immune system, to contribute to the development of heart disease, and then to cause other kinds of autonomic nervous system effects like headaches and irritable bowel syndrome and other kinds of things that are associated with stress. So what can we do? Well, when we're coping with stress, one thing that we can do is focus on the problem when we try and cope. So change the situation. So if the thing that's stressing you is the amount of traffic that you have to face between home and work, you might think, okay, well, let's see what I can do about this. So can I move closer to work? Can I find a bus line so I don't have to, at least I'm not the one driving? Can I find a carpool partner so I can get in the carpool lane? Right? These kinds of strategies that would actually focus on the situation. Then there's the emotion-focused coping. I can't change the situation, so I've got to figure out a way to deal with my own emotional needs. So if I'm completely frustrated by my commute and I can't change my commute in any way, maybe I can change my reaction to my commute. Maybe I can make it so that I actually like commuting because now I'm listening to a book on tape and I really like listening to a book on tape. And actually I'm kind of sad when I get to work or I get home because I'm like right at the crux of my story and I actually enjoyed my commute. Or maybe while I'm sitting in traffic, I'll meditate, not transcendental where I go someplace else, but I just sit there with my eyes open and I just concentrate on my breathing. And I breathe in for a count of 3, hold it for a count of 3, release it for a count of 3. And I just sit there and I do that so that I keep my blood pressure down and I kind of can relax. And so I tend to my own emotional needs. Things that can affect how resilient we are in the face of stress are whether we perceive like that we have control over the event or not. This is an example from a study where they had an executive rat who, when he felt his tail get shocked, if he spun the wheel in front of him, it would turn the shock off. Then we have the subordinate rat who also has a wheel, but it turns out that wheel doesn't do anything. The only way that his tail stops being shocked is if the executive rat spins the wheel. So the subordinate rat has no control. And then the control rat was just there to see if maybe being in a box was stressful. He wasn't being shocked, and he was there for control purposes. Okay, what they found is that the subordinate rat had much higher rates of stress-related illnesses, cardiovascular problems and things like that, than the executive rat. And so what the researchers concluded is that if you have a sense of control over the things that are happening to you, they will be less stressful to you than if you feel like just random bad things are happening. Even if you don't really have control, but if you have a perception of control. So if you can say to yourself, okay, maybe I have a boss who has an unpredictable personality and is, sometimes in a great mood and sometimes in a horrible mood. Maybe I could have a perception that I have control by saying, well, it seems like the boss is less likely to yell at me if I'm at my desk when the boss arrives. So maybe I'll just make sure I'm always there early. So I'll have this perception that I'm somehow controlling the way that the boss is reacting, when in fact it may not have any impact. But it makes me feel better that at least I'm trying, that I feel like I'm doing it. My explanatory style, I mentioned pessimists before. Here we have the little engine who just plain gives up. I know I can't. This would be a pessimist, a person who gives up, who thinks negative thoughts, who expects the worst, things like that. Having an optimistic explanatory style, where a person, not a Pollyanna who says, oh, nothing bad could possibly happen, I'm sure it'll all work out. Instead, it's an optimist who says, okay, so if I work diligently, or if I keep this managed, or if I do these things, I'll have better outcomes. And a person who has that sense of control, that more optimistic outlook, tends to have more resilient outcomes. And then people with social support. Here I found a picture on the internet of somebody who, I don't know which one, but somebody needs to go into the hospital. And there's all their friends there to encourage them and be there to support them when they're going into the hospital. Having that kind of social support makes us more resilient. And a lot of times during our most stressful periods of our life, look at that 18 and 19-year-old bar where earlier I had shown you was the most, highest levels of stress of our lifetime. You'll also notice this is also the time when we have the highest levels of social support. And so when we have social support, we're going to be much more resilient in the face of stressors. So what can we do to manage our stress? This will be that emotion-focused coping idea. Well, one thing we can do is aerobic exercise. I don't mean to keep saying exercise, but it really does. Like pumping blood, exchanging oxygen, those kinds of things really do clear out the stress hormones. It kind of tricks your body into thinking that you have that general adaptation syndrome experience where for 20 minutes, your heart rate got up, you're breathing a lot faster, you're exchanging oxygen, your brain's like, well, I must have run from a bear. I survived. Now I'm going to kick in with all the reparative stuff that'll help to return my body to normal. So aerobic exercise helps to kick us over into the repair situation in our bodies. So here we have the depression score among the no treatment group is the orange bar, and then the people who did aerobic exercise in the green bar. And you'll notice that there was a significant drop in depression rates for those people who engaged in aerobic exercise. So aerobic exercise helps us to maintain, all sorts of health and helps us to manage stress. Biofeedback is another strategy. This is where you have a little electrode that collects information about your heart rate and then gives you a visual indicator of where your heart rate is. And you can, through breathing exercises and other kinds of visualizations, learn to control your own heart rate so it brings your blood pressure down. This was a really popular thing back in the 70s. But you can do this with your iPhone now or your Android phone. They have little apps where you can put your finger on it and it can detect your heart rate. You can actually do biofeedback on your phone now. Meditation. Again, I don't mean transcendental meditation. I mean like breathing patterns, focusing inward, not clearing your mind. Even just little tiny bits. If anybody else is like me, it's hard to clear your mind. But just little tiny bits. If you can spend 10 seconds sort of just thinking nothing, it can really, really help you to cope with stress. So meditation, yoga can put you into that mindset. Relaxation. Oh, my relaxation picture is not popping up. I had a little picture of, those little Zen garden type things where you can take a rake and you can just rake the sand. And your goal is to try and get it into just perfectly parallel, perfectly neat little rows. That kind of relaxation. For me, I took up knitting, and it's very relaxing because it's just super repetitive. You can just completely veg. And, a lot of people have been reporting how much knitting helps them with their stress. So just like those kinds of repetitive things. So relaxation. Oh, there's my scratching thing. Yay! All right, so that's enough for right now. Let's come back and talk about how we establish whether a person's healthy or not.